Hi everybody, it's Andy Mack here, bringing you a presentation a bit different from the norm. This is a presentation on the Great Camp at Chobham in Surrey that occurred in 1853. What you see in front of you is the Queen Victoria Monument that was erected in 1901 at the time of Queen Victoria's death to commemorate the fact that Queen Victoria went to Chobham Common in Surrey in England in the summer months of 1853 and reviewed her army that were camped and on manoeuvres there. Chobham Common is about 8 miles from the wargaming convention Warfare in Farnborough, and obviously it's fairly nearby. I've been walking my dog in the area for a number of years and I have extensive knowledge of Chobham Common. This project's taken me about a year to get my head around and formulate, and hopefully there'll be some interest either through wargamers or through local people or through people interested in military history involving the period of the Crimea War. So a bit closer look at the monument. I think the monument's been replaced since 1901, or certainly parts of it has. The inscription reads, "In memory of the noble life of Queen Victoria, who reviewed 8,129 of her troops on this common on June the 21st, 1853. After a reign of 63 years, she rested from her labours in January 22nd, 1901. This cross is erected by 400 parishioners in 1901. And there's another view of the monument there, and obviously by its nature it's probably quite probable that the top part of it has toppled over at some point and got damaged and needed to be replaced. Description of the Great Camp by the National Army Museum in London is that in 1853, Chobham Camp was the scene of the first large-scale manoeuvres in Britain since the Napoleonic Wars. Unease at Russia's ambition in the Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean prompted an increase in British military activity. These preparations proved invaluable in the Crimean War between 1854 and 1856. From the 14th of June to 25th of August, 8,000 men, 1,500 horses and 24 guns mustered on the heathland in Surrey for drill, field operations and parades under the command of Lieutenant General Sir later Field Marshal John Colborne, 1st Baron Seaton. It attracted large crowds of spectators, including royalty and foreign dignitaries, and was recorded in numerous paintings and prints. And it's those paintings and prints that's going to be the focus of our attention for this presentation. And what we plan to do is see if we can locate the locations in the geography today that the prints may purport to represent, or where the artist may have sat for sketching, drawing or painting their pictures. Obviously, moving on from, we have to be very cautious. I've included here, unrelated to Chobham Common, but a very famous picture in the United Kingdom held by the National Gallery in London. It is of one of Constable's landscape paintings called The Cornfield. John Constable was a famous landscape painter in England, and his period where this was painted was 1826, so a bit before the Great Camp. But why I've included it is the fact that this painting was constructed. He lived in the local area here, which is the Suffolk and near the Essex border, and he lived here as a young man, and in later life lived in London, and he actually painted his masterpieces in his studio in London using his experience and illustrations, notes from that he'd taken from the local area of Suffolk. It's in the area of Dedham Vale in Suffolk, which is on near the Essex border, and he would then create his what are now considered masterpieces from those. This is apparently the location called Fen Lane, which is a lane he regularly walked to and from as a young man, and this corner has apparently been identified as representing where he's painted this picture. However, why I've included these details is the fact that Constable would also add information to his paintings and if you like, fabricate the views and things to suit his ends of creating interest, romance or rustic charm, and so the landscape quite changed. In fact, the building, what's suggested to be buildings, you can see in the middle distance there, or representing buildings, a church, perhaps a church tower. If you stand in that view today and look in that direction of the corner on Fen Lane where the road turns that corner, there is no buildings there and church there, and there never has been. So he would add aspects to his landscape to encourage its interest for his viewers. And on that also, Fen Lane is actually the lane on the right hand side, and obviously the area where the boy's drinking remains a damp sort of recess area where pooled water will gather after rainstorms or in the damper period of the year. So that is, it would seem consistent. But on the left hand side is a couple of miles down the road, a place called Flatford Road or Flatford Lane. I can't remember what exactly it's called, but why I've included it is that you can be quite the artist may well have used influences from different geographical locations for creating his paintings, and it's really the message being that you can be quite deceived by the local and modern landscape when you're trying to interpret any historic paintings or illustrations or sketches. It can all be a complete lot of fantasy. They can overemphasize features, they can remove features, and have complete artistic license to do whatever they choose. So on that, this is just a bit of fun today when we're looking at the prints of the Chobham Camp. It's not an academic study. Hopefully you'll draw some interest from what I'm presenting and agree with me that some of them do represent the landscape that you can see today, but there's also an awful lot of question marks around some of them as well, because the landscape clearly has changed, and obviously, as I said, this is just a bit of fun. It's a non-commercial enterprise, and it's just literally another, hopefully an interesting presentation for my YouTube channel. I'm not planning to do anything more than that. I do have probably enough knowledge Chobham Camp. So what is Chobham Common? It's a lowland heathland in the north part of Surrey, in England, which is one of the counties of England, which is considered today to be it is a scientifically protected area because of its ecosystem. Lowland heathland is fairly rare in the southeast, or this part of the southeast, and as a result there is lots of rare birds and lizards and things on the common, and it's for those reasons that the common is celebrated today. There's very little mention of the events of the Great Camp. It is purely for the ecology and nature reserve type aspects of the common, and on that the landscapes changed quite drastically, in so much that if we're led to believe the illustrations from the Great Camp at that time, there's a lot less grazing, and as a result a lot of the undergrowth and areas have been led to rewild, if you like, and a lot of the areas of the camp where the soldiers were camping is now completely inaccessible due to high concentrations of gorseland, which is a very thick and prickly bushes that can grow up to sort of 10-12 feet high. And I do wonder whether Surrey Wildlife Trust has purposely let the areas where the soldiers have camped to grow wild, because an awful lot of soldiers were present, an awful lot of members of the public attended over the months, and as a result there will be a lot of historical artifacts. From the Surrey History Centre, there's been from what they've told me, there's been very little archaeological study allowed on the common, certainly in recent years, and we're not aware of any before that. The common has been used not just for the 1850p period military camp, but also in the 1870s the British Army did a number of mock battles around the area and made redoubts in some of the buffs for local militias to learn about warfare, and also obviously in the World War I period there was an awful lot of trenching and ordnance being let off around the common, and in World War II and from World War One and onwards to World War II, the MOD's had a base at Chobham, just adjacent to the Common, and we'll come on to that, where they've researched tanks. And obviously you may have heard of Chobham armour. Well, that's featured from one of the locations here on the Common, which I'll show you. And it's this Common where they would have experimented a lot with the tanks in between the World War One and World War II periods, and a bit beyond there. So as I said, this is an area of where the soldiers were camped. Marbay Fane's divisions were camped in the first rotation, and as you can see, it's very high in gorse. That gorse there is up to sort of chest height, and if you further to venture into that area, it would go up to head height and perhaps beyond. So, and it is very dense and difficult, and I dare say it's to detract metal detecting and things like that, because it's really quite. We do get forest fires. It's not forest fires, sorry, heathland fires. So, and that really is a fire hazard because gorse burns very, very oily and quite vigorously. So it is a bit curious why they've let so much of it go to gorseland. Part of the Common also has wetlands, and it's again from the History Centre, the Royal Engineers apparently were responsible for ensuring access to water, and they were quite ingenious in the way they utilised the water areas on the Common, creating troughs, sluices, and moving the water around so that the thousands of horses present, 1,500 horses present, were able to rotate and access the water without any bottlenecks or delay. So it's quite celebrated, and a lot of, I think the wells were dug, obviously trenching and sluicing and troughing for the horses. And the map we're going to use to navigate what I'm talking about is the map that is in all the car parks of the Common, which is for public access. They encourage you to take photographs of it and use it to help you navigate the Common. So that, in the spirit of that, that is what we're doing today. As you can see, it's a north-south illustrated map, the north area being the sort of red circular trail. The two circular trail things, the blue and the red, are both the north trail and the south trail. It's mainly the red trail, the lower part of the red trail we'll be focusing on, and also the upper part of the blue trail area. In the middle, dissecting the Common, is the M3 motorway, and quite sadly it really does devastate part of our area of focus quite significantly, with changing the landscape, and I'll show you as we go forward. But it's this map will be a closer look. As I said, we're starting our talk in the area, the P in the middle basically of the map, by adjacent to the M3 motorway, Staple Hill car park. We'll then be moving across to where you can see Chickabiddy Hill on the left hand side, along the, again adjacent to the M3, but just in the other side of the M3, we'll be going to the last two dots of that footpath there as you approach the crossroads. That crossroad is called the Roundabout car park, and today it's a roundabout, but in those days it was a crossroad location. And on the map we're going to show you in a moment, you can see that crossroads. But in the area of our main focus in that area, it will be the last two dots and the last four dots. Is quite significant to this presentation, so orientate yourself there. And then we'll be going to the area of the Long Arm, which is at the back of Oyster Hill, where there are buffs that go along towards where the cavalry were located, which is the Longcross station there, and down to the Longcross car park. The Longcross station, the Longcross car park areas where the cavalry actually all were camped during the Great Camp, and from that it went on to become the area where the MOD base was for the Ministry of Defence base and tank research space. And you may have, as I said, you may have heard of Chobham armour. Well, that was where it was developed and made. Well, I don't know made, but certainly developed. And then interestingly, today that is a Netflix film studio, so it's now completely civilianized area for large warehousing and film studios. And then Longcross, we're ending our tour at the Longcross car park area. Just south of there is a place called Flutters Hill, and some prints of mine demonstrate the sort of reenactment battles that they were doing there. So we'll be ending our tour there. Moving on, so as I said, this is another zoomed in part of the same map. We're starting at Staple Hill, as you can see, Chickabilly Hill and the footpath along, and then we'll be crossing over to the last 2 dots and 3 dots of the footpath just south of the roundabout car park, heading up to the Long Arm and the buffs all along the back of Oyster Hill, and then ending up in the area where the cavalry were billeted. So just as I said, the roundabout just where the Chobham Road goes, the Windsor Road and Sunningdale Road. So this is the very left-hand side of that last map, and it's the intersection that was shown as a crossroads. South of this map would be Chobham, and the north it goes Sunningdale, then Windsor, and so some of the diagram it shows the Windsor Road, and then to the left it's Windlesham, and then Chertsey, Egham, and also Staines is in that direction. So part of the map we're going to be focused on shows. So the map we're going to be focused on to help us is the map by James Wild, 1853, of the Chobham Camp, and it was really a how to get there type of map, quite detailed, and it's a marvel really. With thanks to the Surrey History Centre, who I spoke to about being able to use this map. It's in their possession, and I had to speak to them to get their permission to use it for this non-commercial presentation, and they were very happy for me to do so without any fee, which was nice because I don't want to have to pay for things if I can help it. So this is the map, the how to get to Chobham Common map. The map shows the deployment and the common, that sort of grey-brown area in the very sort of central middle left, central middle right of the map. But our actual focus and attention is going to be on the insert, so that where that blown up on the right-hand side of the deployment area, and so. That up. This is that insert. So just to navigate, really, Staple Hill is at the end of basically the guards. If you look at the blue and red in the middle, the guards, that are where the guards are camped. That's at the back of a hill called Oyster Hill. Oyster Hill has a sort of buff area along the sort of edge of where the guards are, roughly speaking. But the hill does actually go across the common quite at different levels, basically, so you can go across there not really realizing you're crossing the hill, but being at the base of the bus, but you're still considered a part of the hill. And then so the Staple Hill is in between the end of the guards. That small block of the guards there on the left hand side is the miners and sappers as listed there, and this was James Wild's representation of the first rotation. There were 2 rotations, one in June to July and the second in July to August, and this deployment here is the June deployment, so the first units that were on the common. The same footprint of camping was apparently used by the second rotation as well, so the cavalry remained where they were, the infantry brigades remained where they were, the rifle brigades and the Royal Artillery. I'm led to understand the Royal Artillery units stayed throughout the whole of the session, and the guards units remained where they were, but just swapped through. So if you can see the roundabout where I show you the road sign, that is the left-hand crossroads on this map. The M3, incidentally, cuts right through. Basically, where the crossroads are is where the M3 goes today, and that sort of intersection has been slightly moved, and the M3 then cuts in front of the General Fane's Brigade's camping area, and I think cuts through where the Royal Artillery are as well. So part of their campment would be affected. It doesn't cut into the Windlesham Road. It's this side of it, so it would really be approximately at some point in the Royal Artillery deployment. It may be just safer there, but I'm suspicious it's not, because when you are at the roundabout you need to walk south a very short way, and if you look on this map it would be sort of roughly where the edge of the Royal Artillery is. That there is the road bridge that goes over the motorway. So there is the motorway from that road bridge looking towards Staple Hill, where we're beginning our tour, but this is just giving you an idea of how much the motorway has devastated the landscape. I believe there probably was been subsidence, and also obviously a lot of earth movement for the creation of the motorway and levelling and so on. Again, looking at the map, that's just to explain where the motorway went, but I think you can get the gist of that. A person by the name of Stevens, who looked at Chobham Common's history back in 2003, I'm told, did also feature a kind of summary of the Great Camp, and he identified the regiments that were present. And so I've taken that information for this. So I've also then asked AI to give me whether these regiments featured in of the first rotation in the battles of the Crimea, and it's thrown up these results. So how accurate this is for AI, I do not know, but it just gives you an idea that obviously quite a lot of the regiments present training on the Common went on to feature quite heavily in the Crimea. I dare say some of them will be accurate, but there may be errors because IA is quite notorious for that. Unfortunately, I haven't, as I said, this is just a fun presentation. I haven't had time to really drill into all the finer details of the military units and the military exercises and so forth. There is accounts that you can read up on it, but there's not a lot of literature on the Great Camp, but there are sort of accounts of soldiers marching and so on and what happened. There's an awful lot of prints as well, but unfortunately in terms of copyright and things, it's very hard to access those for presentation purposes, and so I've been quite limited in what I can actually talk about. And but there are plenty of other sites I've identified, I believe, that I do not have access to publicise their prints. And I can happily, if anyone is particularly interested, I can show you which ones they are at some point, perhaps by other means. So the cavalry of the first rotation also included highlighted regiments that featured in the Charge of Light Brigade. So there were two of the regiments there, but the first rotation are the 1st Regiment Life Guards, 6th Dragoon Guards, Carbineers, and then the 13th Light Dragoons and the 17th Light Dragoon Lancers. The commanders, again, I AI'd what commanders were with those regiments, and it suggests that Cardigan was indeed present. Whether that's true, again, it's an AI search, so I can't guarantee, but in all likelihood, it is quite possible he was there, certainly for some of the time, I would imagine. And then the 2nd infantry rotation, that's obviously the 1st battalions left for the 2nd battalions to arrive, so the Grenadier Guards, Colston Guards, Scots Fusilier Guards. Interestingly, the 2nd Rifle Battalion were the 1st battalion on the Common for the 1st rotation, and it's the 1st battalion who came to the 2nd rotation. And as you can see, there's other famous regiments there: North Ridings, the Cameron Highlanders and Connaught Rangers. And from the cavalry, again, 2 further regiments that charged with the Light Brigade, but also the Royal Horse Guards and the Scots Greys. And one of my favourite prints is of the Scots Greys, and again, AI is telling me that these were the commanders present. I can't guarantee that that's the case, obviously. Paget being one of the ones who AI believes to have charged with the Light Brigade. Just a side-by-side map, not very effectively presented, to be fair, but it's just to show that the road layouts seem to have changed very little. The cross axis is more or less intact. I think there may be a slight deviation on the Windlesham and Chertsey Staines Road, which is the upper road of the y-axis, where it crosses in just the area by the guards. I think they obviously, it's now a roundabout. It's been moved slightly to allow the motorway really to carve right across the central axis of the world map. I don't think the motorway actually cut through the guards deployment area, because they were the other side of the Chobham Road, and the Chobham Road remains seemingly more or less intact, but part of it may have been just slightly cut through for the motorway. I have to study that section to see if there's any clues, but at the moment I'm just assuming that way the sort of devastation of the motorway and ground movement would have been, it probably would have carved taken a little bit of the back of the area where the guards were deployed, but it's a very large area, so. So again, looking where we're starting is Staple Hill Car Park, and we're moving from there, which is very central P, moving across to the, as I said, the 2 dots or 3 dots at the end of the roundabout car park, just south there on the eastern side, featuring Chickabiddy Hill at some point also, and then looking at Long Arm and the cavalry deployment area, which is between Longcross Station, which was an MOD station originally for tank moving, and I'm assuming private personnel to go there clandestinely, and it's now, we'll see, just a public station, I think. The first image we're looking at is the Chobham Fiesta, which is a cover for music that was composed for the time, again in 1853. It's held by the National Army Museum, and it's a view from of the Chobham camp from Staple Hill. And that's it there today. Mildmay Fane's infantry would have been deployed all along the edge there in the foreground. The Chobham, I call it the Chobham Gap, so if you hear me mention that, that's what I'm referring to, and that's that sort of where the trumpet trees there, well, the Chobham is obviously beyond those trumpet trees behind the hills, and Windsor Sunningdale is the road. That's so you can see all the long trail of wagons and horses and things travelling along. It's probably the Royal Artillery are the tents that are located on the hill, if this is an accurate portrayal. It's that sort of area where they would have been, and the motorway cuts right through there now today. So there's a possibility the motorway could have just missed them, but I don't think it is the case, to be honest. Today the gap isn't so broad as that it would appear. The camp at Chobham is a very similar picture, a different picture, but very similar from the same aspect, looking from Staple Hill, and it's apparently taken immediately after the arrival of the troops. When I say taken, I'm assuming they mean the print made or whatever. I'm not sure how the technology of it is today, but it's a lithograph, so whatever that means. And again, it's held by the National Army. And that's the same view. Obviously, the figures aren't pointing, but it's apparently soon after the arrival, the soldiers setting up camp. And as you see, the relationship between Scottish soldiers and Chobham Hill is relevant to the coming slide as well, because the Scottish 42nd Battalion or Regiment were the ones nearest Chobham Hill. Sorry, Staple Hill. And that's the view today. As you see, a lot of undergrowth and a lot of tree cover that wasn't there then. The Chobham Gap is the sort of gap you can see if you look along the horizon. There's sort of three trees, two light coloured trees and one dark coloured tree. Well, just in the middle dark light coloured tree, there's a little gap there. That's the Chobham Gap today, and where those sort of landmark trees in the diagrams would have been. That's quite significant for a later print, which I'll talk about. And you can see the sort of V in the horizon there, where the sort of grade V is where the motorway bridge goes over the motorway. The Chobham Road sort of runs along the tree line. That you can see the bottom of the tree line is where the Chobham Road would follow. And the reviews are made by Queen Victoria in the sort of field you can see just below the tree line on the right hand side there, upper right hand side of just below the horizon. So that's the view today, quite obstructed by the amount of trees growing. The trees that you can see in the picture, they would all long be gone. They're not the same trees there today, so they're all seemingly long gone. Whether it was because the soldiers used it all for firewood, I don't know, but there was quite a heavy tree planting after this period, whether within 10 years, 20 years, quite after, an awful lot of the area was replanted with trees. So, and some of the trees remain in this sort of area today, but they were not, the trees you see today are not contemporary with this period. Moving around, this is just moving, the next photo is just moving just round slightly to the northwest. We were looking west in the paintings, and the original photograph was looking west from Staple Hill. If you're taking the orientation of the car park maps correctly, if that orientation is accurate and not with the north-south marker, then this is looking west and from Staple Hill. And we've just moved it slightly around to the northwest to show you that there is how the trees also similarly look, and also to show you how the motorway sort of cuts through the area of focus, and it has levelled some of the area to it would have. Again, this map. I think I've included it here to emphasise where the motorway goes, but I've kind of explained that. It's just below the Chobham Road, which sort of journeys behind where the guards were deployed today. That intersection there in the centre would be changed today. It's now a roundabout and a road bridge over the motorway, and the motorway then would cut through approximately behind or right through the middle of the where the Royal Artillery is, because it's fairly close and adjacent to the Windlesham road that goes from these crossroads. This is looking from Staple Hill, just on the slopes of Staple Hill, as you see where the motorway is, and beyond that Oyster Shell Hill, and the guards would be the Chertsey and Windlesham Road runs sort of approximately where the tree bases of the tree lines are, in a long line along the top of the ridge there, and just the other side of that tree line is where all the guards were deployed. And if the road remains how it was, and I can't really see a great real, because it is a little way away from where the motorway activity would be. I can't see a great reason why they would reroute it. Further up this line, there would possibly be calls because the motorway cuts through it, but and that would have been reconfigured. But this part of it, I doubt whether they've changed it. And so the guards were, just to say, over where all the trees are. They would have been all deployed. And where you'd be looking here into this corner, you would see the tents of the miners and sappers that were camped alongside the guards. This is me again looking at that northwest position, just demonstrating the steepness of the hill. It's hard to portray that on just a photo without scale or anything, but that's how steep it is. It is a steep hill, and it's a very prominent feature in the local area when you look out of it, and it features quite heavily in a lot of the illustrations of the camp. So this is the next photograph that we are comparing to a painting of. That's the car park of car park of Stable Hill, looking west through the trees, and we're comparing it to the Oil on Canvas by Edward Matthew Ward, and again it's held by the National Army Museum, and it's painted in 1853. That's a side-by-side. I've walked all over the common, and I'm fairly confident that this is indeed the location. What the clues being, you've got the soldiers present there are all Scottish soldiers. The soldiers were camped, who were camped nearest to Stable Hill were the Highland regiments, 42nd in the first rotation, and the way the landscape is, the trees obviously are different trees. They're not the same trees there, but they're of the same kind, and it presents the same sort of aspect, if you like. So it's kind of almost in keeping, I think. And the way if you look at the flagpole, the hill does sort of sink away in that manner if you go over to that location today. Interestingly, in some of the prints, they shows tentage in this area. And I do wonder, this is a part of the early rotation where they may have bivouacked instead of having tentage, and whether the tents arrived later or in the second deployment, the units that were here had tents with them that they put up there instead of having it as bivouacs was. So this suggests to me it's the first deployment. I might be wrong on that, it could be the second, but certainly in one or two of the prints I've seen, it looks like this area has white tenting in the manner that they have got in under the trees there, but it's here. There's another possibility is that during the second print, the trees that you can see have been cut down by the soldiers making firewood, and it's left these pet tents exposed in the manner to present that they're in this area where the bivouacs are. So that's the side by side again, slightly different angle of the car park, just a bit further forward or back. As I said, where the flagpole runs away the hill there, you can see where the path goes. It does, the hill, you may not quite see it in this aspect, but it does sink away in that manner. So interestingly, a lot of the prints I see of the hill, there's no flagpole there, but you do see tents or things behind or in this part of the hill as well in some of them. There's an awful lot of prints I can't access or for this purposes of this presentation because of copyright and restrictions on their use and having to buy them and stuff like that. I do have my own prints which I'm showing, which I'm able to show, but most of them I'm using under the agreements of the sort of open license that the National Army Museum have for non-profit organisations and presentations such as this. So again, that's a painting. Just again, you can see the soldiers are Scottish, wearing kilts, and one there in the foreground wearing a traditional Scottish hat. I can't remember what they call them now. Is it a Glengarry, and then a sort of plaid type setup. The next one is again Scottish soldiers at Chobham Common 1853. Now it could be either clear up at the end of the camp, or it could be at the beginning. Where it listed that the 93rd Highlanders were they at the beginning or at the end, but as you look in front of you is Stable Hill, I believe, Now, it could be a fabrication and the sort of landscape generically put in there to represent Chobham Common, and no tents or anything like that. We don't know if this is an accurate portrayal or not, but it does show soldiers, and I'm led to believe that that view is it remains similar today, which you can and so that view there is I believe in the area. Sort of see where the of Staple Hill car park is. It's in those sort of 2 or 3 dots you can see there, and it's either there or it will be on the other side of the motorway as you sort of go around the to the right hand side, where the footpath on the other side of the M3 motorway comes out of the underpass and then sort of doglegs around towards where the roundabout car park is, in that sort of area there possibly. So this is on the nearest side of the motorway to Staple Hill, and as you can see, it's a credible representation. I'm very sorry I put the historic illustration obstructing part of the camera view. I don't know why I did that. It's just you can sort of float them about, so it must have just saved it like that, unfortunately. But you get the gist of the aspect it could be. And interestingly, the horsing heather there is the area where all the infantry brigades were camped. Mildmay Fane in the first rotation were all camped in that area to the right there. And similarly, if you look at the illustration, is that a sort of similar rough area you can see along there, and did the soldiers clear the area perhaps when they arrived for camping? We don't know, but certainly this painting here or illustration here is probably the most rugged area that I can see of all the illustrations, to suggest that there is a bit of undergrowth in parts of the common. And that's at the other side of the motorway, as I said. Remember I mentioned the dogleg? Well, there is an underpass that's approximately where you can see the sort of motorway, and there's a tree line that comes from the left to the right, and sort of there's an underpass just below there so you can cross over. And this is in that area where I mentioned about the dogleg looking across the other side of the motorway. But again, you've got the Staple Hill as a central feature, the motorway near to where the soldiers on the horses are probably, and the hill sort of dips in the way, similar to where the motorway is on the left hand side. And again, you've got that sort of bump of trees that may be consistent with the landscape in this painting. And it could well be that this is although they may not have been camped in this location, they may have set up or were finishing off here. Looks like they're just cooking a brew. There's very few tents here, so it could be part of the leaving party or early arriving party. I can't remember which one the 93. So the next one is a similar location to that second photo, the Rifle Brigade, 1853. And again, you can see Chobham Hill there. The landscape where the motorway is, it looks a lot more undulating than what it is today. And this painting, it's a little bit unsure whether they're high up looking down, or are they low down looking up, because Staple Hill, where we were earlier, is a lot more leveler than it appears here, so I'm assuming they might have been slightly lower down, which is interesting because those tents lower down probably wouldn't have been the soldier tents. I'm led to understand the Rifle Brigade would have been a bit further back, but I don't know. This also could be exactly where the motorway is, so it's difficult to really navigate. But you can see the area where Staple Hill is, and the sort of parade area of the camping area, of the infantry brigades. And that's a similar shot today, or similar location, or certainly having Staple Hill where it was. And I'm led, the soldiers, think if they were at this location, they'd like to have been down the hill a bit, because this is up on the hind area. But unfortunately, down the hill a bit does start incorporating the earth from the motorway, I would imagine, the levelling area. So that's where we're looking at the moment, is those last 2 dots where the roundabout car park is. Just south of there on the eastern side is the 2 dots there that would then looking across to Staple Hill. And that's the sort of area we're in. And the camping and Mildmay Fane's infantry brigades would have been along, that's a rough traverse along the horizon there on the right hand side. The guards would be over to our left hand side from Staple Hill. and the magnet, what they call the magnet, is where the Queen and everyone had their tentage for the reviews. That would have been just quite near here, just to our left-hand side, basically. And that's the two views side by side. I say it's not quite right, but it's not far off, I don't think. And in the Rifle Brigade, I think, probably would have been camped behind this area rather than in exactly this location. And that's the motorway where it's cutting through. Again, you say it's very sort of devastating, and the area around it is fairly flat, so I'm assuming there was a bit of levelling there with moving the earth around and so on. And as a result, I would imagine there's been a fair bit of subsidence of land as well. The Great Military Camp Common starts getting a bit more exciting now. These are the prints midway through. 1853, again held by the museum. And this is a sort of panorama. You've got Stable Hill, you've got the Chobham Gap, the road coming through, and where we were with the Rifle Brigade isn't far from where these people were on the right-hand side, members of the public. And the next view, I've sort of tried to do a panorama to show that similar view. Just so where we are again is in that just the south side of the crossroads on the left-hand side, where it sort of says, is it Lacey? Sir de Lacey, is it where the Lacey is? It's just sort of where the A probably is in that gap there. And this is it today. Where the Chobham Gap is just sort of by the in between the two pylons there, or the two sort of electricity pylons. The motorway carving through the centre ground, and Stable Hill is actually on the very, very left-hand side. It's not in the view, that is in the bottom picture. And I stretched the two to try and correlate them, so there's a little bit of playing with the image, unfortunately, or zoomed it in or out. I've stretched my photograph a little bit to correlate with the one below. And this is just obviously looking at the Chobham Gap from where the people were, and we've got a view of that in a moment. So the people, and that's a similar location today. Unfortunately, the trees are all obscuring, and the motorway is just beyond those trees, so a little bit further, but not far from those trees. And that's it today. So we do, and it might well be the people were a little bit more towards the edge of the hill, if you like, so towards where the bottom of the tree line is. Perhaps the people were there, and then there's a sunken recess of the road. We don't know, it's hard to say, but we're looking in the general gist of that part of the picture. And this is again from where we were. We are just, you can see we've just taken a step back a little bit way, just to see the Chobham Gap again, but we're further back from where earlier photo, and where the people. And then this is where it starts getting exciting. Military view of the Chobham Common, troops returning from their camp after a field day. Again, National Army Museum, London. So this shows you where the review area was. So you've got Stable Hill, you've got the Chobham Gap, and then you've got the tentage in the lower part of the hill is where the Queen and everybody would have been reviewing the troops. Up here is the sort of headquarter magnet, they called it, and when the Queen was staying, which is I think the Queen's tentage, so that would have been just out of view beyond the flagpole there, sort of down the back of that part of the knoll. It was a sort of, well, when the Queen was there, they put, I think it was 8 foot high or 6 foot high canvas walling all around it, so it was quite luxurious and had sort of banqueting halls and all sorts of things for dignitaries. So quite an interesting. Today it's just a massive gorse and very inaccessible, sadly. And this is probably one of my favourite of the prints, and it's quite a good location comparison, this one. So there's a view of Chobham Common, troops passing before Her Majesty on the 21st June 1853. Again, National. So this is the location. You've got Stable Hill on the right hand side, you've got the hill coming down, the motorway would cut straight through where the troops are marching, not far in front of where the Queen is. And what's interesting is the lay of the land, where the soldiers are parading beyond the royal party there into the middle distance. You look at the next the field, so the Queen would have been, these actual scrapings are I thought initially they might have been archaeological studies, but I've since learned that all over the common they put these sort of the fire short trenches to give a fire break, because a lot of the gorse is very, very inflammable once it gets get going, and so it enables the emergency services to sort of manage the fire more easily than if you just have open space. But they obviously try to restrict the amount of damage they do to the ecosystem, so that sort of you have these sort of short strips, and very typically and interestingly, it's at the location approximately where the royal party would have been. So it's quite bizarre, really. I dare say some of them may have been also kill two birds once to do a bit of archaeological study as well, but it's not very comprehensive. But they are scrapings for the fire. And as you see, the land of the field sort of goes into the middle distance there, where you can see the line of soldiers in the illustration. Again, it could be a complete fabrication, but I would imagine, because this is what a lot of people came to view, you can see all the people in the foreground there, the illustrators would have to have a degree of accuracy of the actual event to enable their credibility of their business. Each one of them probably advertised their business as they sold these pictures and items, and they would probably be found out quite quickly if the people who were attending their dignitaries, important people, identified that it was a fantasy picture. So yeah, that's quite. And that's again a slightly different shot. And you see the fire scrapings there. That's a royal party. Interestingly, Oyster Hill, or the busts, which we'll come on to shortly, are kind of behind here. And that's again the aspect with where the royal party would have been. Soldiers marching down from Staple Hill all along this area to our foreground, on the right hand foreground, the Queen and that to the left hand, and the sort of tentage and the magnet all over to the left here. The next one is one of my favourites as well, is the 2nd Royal North British Dragoons, the Scots Greys at the Common in 1853. Interestingly, this was or seemed to have been published in 1854, so I don't know whether it was when it was actually created. So with that, a word of caution, clearly it's not contemporaneous. They could have done after the event, and it could all be fabricated, and I dare say a lot of it was constructed together, but the landscape, I feel I've drawn some similarities to, and it's worth plying image. So this, I believe, is the long arm. The bust is Oyster Hill here, and the guards, in my opinion, would be camped up onto the left area of, see where the cannon fire is, or what looks to be cannons being fired. The guards would be up and beyond the trees there, in that area, and this buff runs all the way along the Oyster Hill. Interestingly, on the map, well done, Oyster Hill includes this area probably where the cavalry are. It's a sort of a low part of the hill and a higher part of the hill, and the buffs are sort of the high part. I can't remember how high they are. If you look on the Ordnance Survey map, it gives you the various heights of the features. But yeah, when you cross along here, you don't really get the feeling that you're going over the hill, but you are part of going over Oyster Hill as well, it seems. So again, is on the long arm section there, sort of between the long arm and Oyster Shell Hill. There are buffs there, which this area is. And this is the buffs on the left hand side there. The trees, as you can see, there's a similar sort of clump of trees. They're not the same trees, they're different, slightly different location, but their buffs do end in that kind of area there. Where the trees are just a bit further forward is where the buffs slope down in that same manner. This is the pathway of the long arm. However, the soldiers quite possibly were a lot closer to the buffs from it looking. I'm not assuming the soldiers were there when he sketched it. He'd added the soldiers there, but the location where it's purported to represent at Chobham Common is I fill in the gap between the road here and the buffs. I've been all over Chobham Common. I can't find anywhere similar, and I think they would be heading towards where the cavalry are camped, away from the military features. And interestingly, if you look on the print, you've got that clump of trees at the end of the buff, but if you look along the horizon there, you can see slight white tentage, and then there's a little grey area of clump of what I looked and I believe to be the trees of the Chobham Gap. He's added that there, and so if that is indeed what it is, then, and you can, if having walked this location, when you get to certain parts of it, you can look across, and although that area is now lots of trees are in the way, when you stand at the Chobham Gap and look back this way, you can see quite clearly the Buff here and Oyster Shell Hill trees that are there today. So the ones you can see on the top of the Buff, you can see them quite clearly, or significantly from. Although there's a lot of trees in between, but you can actually see them from the area in front of the Chobham Gap there. So yeah, so that's I think is a direct hit, but I could be wrong. As I said, you can be quite fooled, and the cannon would be somewhere in where the sort of probably in amongst the trees there somewhere. There's a slight recess and where the cannons would be firing. And that's the trees on top of the Buff. I say the angle can be a bit deceiving, but the Buffs do end in the way, and I would imagine, if that illustration is correct, these trees, obviously not the original trees, those trees would have been a little bit further down the Buff than these ones are. Or it could be the angle's different, or the artist chose to do it slightly differently. Who knows? And that's the end of the Buff, as I said. So one would imagine if the trees would be a little bit further down than what they are currently today. And the cavalry would have been coming along this section here, a bit further behind us, sort of thing. But and that's it, but further along. And it just this one demonstrates how overgrown the Buffs are. But you can see that it's an ongoing line of hills that run all the way along to where the cavalry deployments are. And interestingly, the guards are all camped just a bit beyond this area here. This was sort of, I think this has sort of redouted the area on top of that Buff there. That's where the artillery were there for whatever reason, and it's sort of brushwood redoubt kind of thing. And then further along is where all the guards would have been camped. And this is just where we are again showing you. So the guards would have been between Staple Hill, Oyster Shell Hill, side of the Chobham Road, along towards the bottom of the Longcross Station bit, where it goes to Longcross Station to Longcross Car Park. So just staying more or less parallel with the Chertsey Road, but inside enough into Oyster Hill to not be on the road, if you know. So yeah, to give you the Buff where we're looking sort of crosses over, or goes really kind of almost in line with the where the guards are, but slightly to the fore, and you sort of cross over that area. It looks like there's a great big hill, but it's quite deceiving. I think the Buffs are the hill bit. You can see the sort of raised ground areas and lower ground areas. So it's when you're going along a long arm, you don't feel you're going over Oyster Shell Hill. So Oyster Shell Hill feels to be where the Buffs are, but the way this is drawn, it looks like Oyster Shell Hill is all this great big area here, and I don't think it is. So this is over at the this is what they call the Burma Road, which is the road that goes along between the Common and where the film studios are. So as you can see, it's on the raised area. Now, obviously, MOD being MOD, they'd be perfectly within their ability to probably build up the area and change all the landscape to prevent people looking down onto what's going on in their site. But from the look of some of the illustrations, if those illustrations are accurately drawn, then they would have been camping up on higher ground, and I'll come on. So this is a tongue-in-cheek one, really. This is looking out in the general area where the cavalry were camped. This is the 8th King's Royal Irish Dragoons, and there is obviously the landscape. You can say, look, it's very similar. I don't for 1 minute think it is the same view, but it is consistent with, because those trees, what you see as making that shape in the hills are trees and not the actual hard land, which the illustration, if the illustration is portraying accurately the background of that view, which we just do not know, then that looks to be quite solid ground, whereas the trees are in the far. It's quite a long way away. Those trees are not nearby, so it's very difficult to determine. It's, I think, probably more coincidence that I'm sort of looking on it thinking, that's very similar. There's another view of a similar kind, which I'll show you in a moment, which is looking the other way. So there's lots of possible, if you're looking at the landscape today, possible views yourself with. That's the same view again. I don't think it's that one though at all, because it's mainly trees. But the trees may reflect the contours of the land. You don't know for sure, but include that map. And this is the other view now we're coming on to. So this is a different view, but looking towards the buffs of the where the Oyster Hill is, and the guards would have been beyond that view. And that's the same one now, and obviously there are similarities. This one is a bit more landscape rather than just trees. You can see the hill going up, and the trees are only kind of in the very top area, and the rest of it is the sort of top of the hill. So think of it what you may. I say I'm not convinced. I think it's coincidental. And that's a closer look. What's interesting is that little bump on the right hand side there is consistent with the sort of the higher left hand. If you look on this map, then you have got a bump on the right hand side and a higher left hand here. But I think you would have seen, and where it could be is near the post office. The post office would be to the left, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, you run yourself in rings looking at this sort of thing. Drive you see sort of the people walking their dogs on the common would have seen me at some point wandering around this course area, looking around the landscape, thinking, "Who's this mad guy?" And so you just get completely fooled, and but it's fun. It is fun. So just you letting your imagination run wild a bit. Who knows? It could be a similar view, but I think there's not enough evidence from that to draw that conclusion. Really, frankly, it is in the area where they're camping for sure. So we can draw similarities. So this where we were is just see where the post office is in the sort of right angle of the guards, and then the cavalry. It's in that kind of corner section there where we were, and so you're looking up at the buffs where the guards are camped. So at the end of the guard line camp, there's a sort of the high buff area, and it's a sort of V intersection, because the high area is also where the cavalry are camped up, where there is now the Netflix and MOD old base, and where the post office was located there because it's near the crossroads, and so people arriving with the mail can quite easily quickly get to a location from both those directions, and it can be distributed. And who knows? But this is an interesting one. This one I can't really locate. I think it could be near the post office, but there's not enough there to say, because it's the 17th Lancers who were at that end of the camp line, and the image sort of shows a lot of sailors, a lot of soldiers sort of sat around, and what's interesting is they're not on high ground here. You've got buffs above you, and that could be Oyster Hill buffs there where the guards were, and this corner would be the camp could be to our right. The raised ground and area of the camp could be to our right, and this is a slightly lower ground area by the post office, perhaps, in which there is lower ground area, and it's fairly consistent with this. If that is the case, again, it could be completely fabricated by the artist to give a general impression in a generic way, and just make it look romantic and it's believable. But if you go to the location where I'm talking about, it's there. You can see similarities, but it's a little bit off the area with the high ground where the soldiers been. And of course, we don't know how that high ground featured when before the MOD and when they camped there. It could well be that it was only high, and then it dropped down into an area of lower ground. So there's no evidence on where it is. So, but are those soldiers on the left hand side looking at their mail and sort of talking amongst themselves about their loved ones? Who knows? But it could be just a mess hall or something like that as well. One would imagine they would need some facilities to sort the post into, enable the soldiers to send and receive posts, and some sort of over-engineered process the Victorians probably involved themselves with. But it is nice seeing. I thought this is a particularly nice painting because you've got the farriers working hard, and obviously a year later, a lot of these people would have been caught up in the charge of the Light Brigade. So the next one, similarly, 6 Dragoon Guards. And interestingly, these ones are on top of the hill, and the view behind is very consistent with if you stand where the hill rises up from to where the Netflix studios are. If you look across through trees, there are trees there now, but it's a similar aspect in the area behind. So, and if my last suspicions or romance of the location was correct, that location would have been to our left-hand side of this photo and down the bottom of the hill, and this is clearly higher ground, and it would be look across to, and the view you're getting is similar to that first picture I showed you where I said it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but that's the sort of view from that location you get. It's that sort of distance where those trees featured. That view was where I took the photo would have been down the bottom of the hill area again, but the middle distance is the landscape where today, if you were looking, if it's the location it could be, then it's that sort of horizon you get. So this is Staple Hill. This next one's are my prints. So we're getting near to the end of the presentation now, but these are my prints of Staple Hill, and yeah. So this is again looking at near where the Highlanders were camped, back at Staple. Yeah, I don't know why these maps, but I think you get the gist. Always look in your own time. Them there for a mistake. So. Yeah, sorry, beg your pardon, I've jumped ahead. This is trying to locate where General Fane's marquee was. This is a watercolour in 1853 by a guy by the name of Campion. Again, it's a National Army Museum. And I think it could be Chickabiddy Hill, I don't know. It's not enough there to determine. You can see again what could be that clump of trees at Oyster Hill, or it could be representing on the right hand side in the distance on the horizon there. It could be it could be Staple Hill, it could be Oyster Hill, it could also be, I don't think it's Staple Hill, but it could, depending what angle this is taken, it could also be like Magnet Hill and hills behind, because obviously most of the illustrations just show the foreground of the Staple Hill where all the camping tents are, but this picture perhaps could even be beyond that, looking from Chickabiddy Hill the other direction. So if it's Chickabiddy Hill, I'm saying Chickabiddy Hill because that would be the central part. The only reason I'm saying it really is it's a little bowl, but it's similar. The ground rises like that Chickabiddy Hill. From what you can see, it's very poor access, but it does rise like that, and it is Chickabiddy Hill would be the central part of that camping deployment. So and the aspect to the right hand side where you see lots of tents a little bit lower down would be consistent with that location of Chickabiddy Hill if indeed it's the same place. It could also be further back. There's a hill also further back. Chickabiddy Hill would be where I would suggest it most likely would be, because you're directly opposite where the Queen's tents are. You'd have view of that. You're above and be a focal point for all the soldiers seeing where the general is. If you were behind on the hill behind, then you wouldn't see the views that you do here. You'd be looking at Chickabiddy Hill. So yeah, that's only a guess though. It could be somewhere else, or it could be again completely fabricated. I couldn't see on the illustrations. I couldn't see any trees at all in the area of Chickabiddy Hill, but there are tents there. So it's difficult. That's Chickabiddy Hill. As I say, we're looking south. So the long line of Mildmay Fane's tents would have been, when you're looking at all the illustrations onto this area, we're looking directly up Chickabiddy Hill, and all the tentage would be across our axis, left and right axis here. So the Chobham Road being to our right and Staple Hill being to our left, some distance, Chickabiddy Hill there. So perhaps that was it, I don't know. But it is, if you look at the knoll there, when you go up there, it's quite an area of flat ground actually, but it does drop away on both sides, similar to where that painting or a watercolor made. But again, that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and we'll never know properly. The military review, the camp at Chobham, returning to cut a few. I think this to look at Chickabiddy Hill, and you can see there are, although you can't see trees, there are some quite sort of established tents in the area of Chickabiddy Hill, which is that sort of if you look at the back of the line of Mildmay's soldier tenting, there's quite a few bigger tents, and it may be perhaps one of those that Mildmay Fane was occupying himself with. But equally, it could be somewhere like being on the side of Staple Hill. You just do not know, and we'll never know. probably. Yes, I don't know why I've just returned to this map here, but most of the rest of our prints are going to be in the areas. And so this is Stable Hill, possibly where the motorway runs straight through. It's the edge of where, but it's sort of going down towards the magnet. So Mildmay Fane's very left-hand side. Left or right-hand side. But yeah, this would be going past the site. These are all Scots there, so it's probably the 42nd are lined along here. Coming from Magnet Hill, and where the bivouacs would have been in the area just as the Stable Hill drops away there. That's the car park area on the left hand side of the hill. This is the Queen coming down. It says this is one of my prints, but it says arrival of Her Majesty at Magnet Hill. Well, Magnet Hill is still quite a way further to our right hand side, so although she's arriving, she's sort of progressing through the lines of troops. And the motorway, as I say, would probably either cut directly where we are behind us or right through this area, possibly. It could be to our right-hand side. It's different. We've got a view here which is similar. So if you can imagine all the tents along the right-hand side here, the Queen would have been passing down on the left here somewhere. Magnet Hill there, probably a bit further up the hill, to be honest, because the trees are quite small. But it's very difficult to get the same aspect from your camera as it is on these prints. You have to and I haven't altered any of them. They've just been, some I've zoomed in and out a little bit. So that's a sort of route that she might have taken. So the motorway is to our left, so there's not a lot of scope there for motorway. Another print of mine. This is again the Scots, again in the area of where the 42nd Highlanders were, but I don't know if these are those soldiers or another group of Highlanders in the later deployment. Because, as I said, the later deployment, because as you see where previously in the Chobham car park of Stable Hill, that area, which I believe to be the area where those bivouacs were, is now got tentage now. Is this the second rotation or later on in the first rotation where they've changed the setup? I don't know. But it's certainly not bivouacs, what you can see. The bivouacs could be closer in towards the hill, there's possibly even, it could be another location, but I'm pretty certain it will be Stable Hill because the Scots were camped at this location. And that's a similar aspect today where, you can see the hill above and the ridgeline, trees, and then Scots in the foreground. So possibly similar sort of aspect perhaps. And this is just showing you how devastating the motorway is to our area of study, really. And the Queen would have progressed along the motorway lane 3 to get to Magnet Hill and crossed over the 2 motorway pathways to Magnet Hill, which Magnet Hill and the tentage and reviewing area would have been to the left of the motorway. Again, a soldier on sentry. The trees you see wouldn't have been there. They were probably a bit further back. So this is probably slightly inaccurate. Because it would be probably a bit more round to our left of the photo where the sentry was, if my orientation's correct, and if the diagram is a representative of what actually was the case, if you know what I mean. The photo I don't think is this photo is actually further around to the right from where the soldier is, and I don't think that's the case because those trees aren't there. They're a new addition. All those trees, the trees that were there. There's a sort of similar footprint today of those trees, pine trees, of obviously new trees, but in the area. And all this area were at the time of the Great Camp, from the illustrations, if we're led to believe them to be true, that part of the hill wasn't treed. And it would have been sort of, the photo being taken would have been really where the right-hand side of the back of the sentry and the sort of middle horizon there, you would have been taking that photo. That's a close-up, just for so you can't see the sutlers behind you can see a triangular, is it marquee or something on the hill there, but you can't actually see where the bivouacs or the tentage are in this shot. So which could be that it is further round where that photo was from. I don't know, but but if you were in the area where that photo was taken from, you'd be looking directly at the tenting. You'd be further around where all the tents were rather than on the edge of the tenting. And that's another picture. This is a postcard I've got. I can't remember what the regiment is. It's on the postcard, but it's a postcard of a painting. So I'm pretty certain I can use it here. It's a contemporary painting, I believe. It says on the postcard. But it's a sort of postcard I got. And again, it's a similar aspect to where the Queen was and the cavalry and the start of the lines of the infantry brigades. The guards would be behind us. The motorway would be cutting through this area, no doubt, quite significantly. That's looking where the approximate area where that picture was taken. As you see, the motorways dominating the landscape. Now, this is getting to the end now. This is Flutters Hill. So the Longcross car park, that P on the right-hand side of the map. Just below there's a footpath that leads a very short distance. You get to, and this is Flutters Hill today. Now, there are two buffs of a similar kind, one behind the other. This is the first one you come from the car park, which is more, perhaps more correct. I don't know, but the other buff may well have collapsed with subsidence or by other means, agriculture or other military exercises, tanks going up and down it, but it's not the same aspect. And this, for me, is more believable, this one, because of the shape of the hill there. The other hill doesn't look like that, but it's difficult you can't categorically say, because obviously the landscape quite likely has changed significantly, in some areas more than others, so it's very difficult to say. But they're very two similar buffs side by side. You've got to cross over one to get to the other, and this is the first one. And that's just a slightly different angle. Again, you've got in the foreground there, you've got a fire trench, and there's also further fire trench, quite a lot of fire trenching on this hill area, fire scrapes, I should say. So yeah, that's the area where that last ship taken, possibly. The hill does look slightly different shape nowadays, so it could be the other one, or it could be this one, but it's slightly changed, or the artist has just done a kind of general, not quite exact picture. Interestingly, you've got soldiers look like they're in a bit of confusion, or they're surrounded, or firing all different directions, and if you look closely as well, and sadly some of the areas I've got slightly out of focus, but in the area at the bottom left right hand corner, there's a lot of members of the public there, and they're all sort of jostling out the way. I'm assuming they're sort of a bit surprised by the shooting going on, but they're all sort of pushing each other and shoving, and equally on the left hand side there's guys who look like they've got top hats and they're sort of racing out the way, getting themselves out of the way, which is a bit funny. And apparently it was quite chaotic, lots and lots of people attended, and they had to sort of prevent members of public access, and people would be gaining access to areas perhaps they shouldn't have done. And that's the second buff today. So we're on the sort of top of the buff you saw from the last picture, and we're looking to the second buff. And as you can see, there's sort of it's either collapsed a bit, or it looks quite different from that other picture. But it's a potential, it's a potential there. It's a final watercolour. It's again by of the Scots Greys. Apparently, it's I think this is at the National Army Museum as well. Hope so. I haven't included it here, unfortunately, but that's where most of my things are. So this is a watercolour. You've got the guards on top of Oyster Hill there. That's the start of where the miners and that would have been. Not miners, miners and sappers. Stable Hill, the line where the Queen came down is very sort of undulating here, but the line where the Queen came down is, you can approximately see a group of red soldiers marching to the right from the sort of central area to the right hand side. But you can also see snow-capped mountains, it looks like, in the background, so I'm not sure they're there in reality. So it's quite an atmospheric picture here, and it is what it is. And equally, interestingly, where the route the Scots Greys are taking is further down. It would be the buffs where that picture we had earlier of the Scots Greys coming along. So So if they travelled down that road, it would be leading towards the Oyster Hill, back of Oyster Hill, where those buffs were, in the direction of them heading to the camp where the cavalry were. So approximately, it's in the area behind the miners there. You got the miners, sappers and miners, looking out towards the. So it'd be on the edge, just off the edge of the sappers and miners, looking onto Staple Hill. So it's in that area. I can't remember what it says there. I've got it upside down on the map there, but there's a. I think it just says Colonel so and so for the sappers and miners. But in that area is probably where this picture's been taken from. Those sort of, that's like raised ground. Perhaps there is some writing on the picture, but I can't read. It says Chobham, but I can't remember what else it says. So yeah, so it would be in the area where the sort of Colonel Villas, that kind of location, that painting was taken from. Because Colonel, where the coal for Colonel, the Colonel, the guards bit there is Colonel H somebody or other, probably in that coal area there, or between that and Villas, that sort of location. So that would be to our left-hand side of this picture. Again, this is just looking out towards Oyster Shell Hill and the back of Oyster Hill where the guards would have been. So this is further down where there's, remember the Scots Gates. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a random one in out of sequence, but this is further down where the Scots Greys were and the buff on the left-hand side. So perhaps could it be the sort of area where that painting was suggested to have been representing? Similarly, the same, and as you see, it's very lot of hedge, thick gorseland and quite heavy underfoot. These are just random shots now, just giving you an idea of the area. That's the zoom in from Staple Hill, looking down to the Chobham Road where the motorway bridge crosses. I've zoomed in a bit there. There is an underpass where these bushes are in the middle part of the picture. There's an underpass that goes under the motorway, which then gives you access to the fields beyond. Chobham Gap is up on the top left-hand side, and obviously all along the front from the Staple Hill here would have been the camping of the infantry brigades. Similarly, this is zoomed out from the same view or similar locations. I think I was a bit further down the road on this one, or the pathway, but just looking down again from the Staple Hill, same view. This would have been, the Queen would have, in that illustration with her going down towards Magnet Hill, she would be passing down to our right hand side here, probably a bit further up behind us, but yeah, she would have been passing down. And Magnet Hill, where the Queen reviewing area and tentage was sort of just behind where that big lorry is on the motorway. In that area just behind there is the field, and in just as the sort of dark areas along the end of that. This is walking along the area in front of the camping area for the infantry brigades. Chickabilly Hill is that, so you can see a very slight crossroads in the line there, and sort of on the horizon of the pathway almost. That leads then up to the pathway up to Chickabilly Hill, which is in the sort of undergrowth behind us, and it's very, very heavily built up. There's a slight open area, flat area, but it is quite heavily, densely built up, and it's very difficult to read the topography. This is just looking from Mildmay Fane's positions, looking across to where the review took place, with the motorway in the middle ground there, and the roundabout car park would be up in the trees, straight, in the horizon central area there. The roundabout car park would be slightly to the left, actually. Then you walk a little bit, cross over the motorway bridge. And this is looking from the Chobham Gap, basically. Now, you can see in the distance there, see where the two pylons is, to the right-hand side there, you can see a sort of raised area. Now, that's the area where you can see the Oyster Shell Hill trees that we're talking about, the buffs. So you can actually see this picture isn't as good as looking at it with your eyes, so it's difficult to see which part of the trees it is, but you can actually see those trees on Oyster Hill, which is the bus, which then, when you remove all the trees that's blocking the view, would mean that the Scots Greys print, if indeed it's a true reflection, would have included the clump of trees up behind us here at the Chobham Gap, and that little grey tiny dot you can see on that painting, I think is the Chobham Gap trees, which would have been in view. Again, that's just looking at the Chobham Gap from further back from where those people were. This is looking from Mildmay, along the lines of Mildmay Fane towards where the guards are, and taking in Steeple Hill. Similar view with. This is obviously back at the view of the Flutters Hill, the first bump. And again, that's the first bump, and you go over that, and then you can just see that second area where the second deployment area was. But this one's got more atmosphere of being consistent with it. But say with the passing of time, it could have been either really. And that's the scrapings I'm on about. This is the second bump, and it's a demonstration. The second bump is to our left here, and so it could possibly be it. But we're a bit further down the hill, and this is an element of the fire breaks. That's the second bump there. Again, it's hard. The other one is, I like it because you can see the contour of the hill quite easily, but because of all the trees behind, it's very difficult to see a contour here. And there is one. When you're there in person, you can see a slight contour. So it's very, again, it's quite possibly believable. And there is a horseshoe area where the people could be progressing up, and but the landscape. I think the landscape slightly subsided, or it could just be that's had a lot of vehicle traction, tanks moving over it, or ordnance being let off in World War I. Who knows? But the landscape's changed, perhaps. And that's again the bump area which we talked about in the second part of the Flutters Hill. So it is a sort of horseshoe behind us again. So was that the bump? But it's slightly different aspect than the other one. Woking is the you can see the sort of tower buildings in the background. It's a sort of big, good train intersection near to Chobham is Woking. That's there. Again, more fire break scraping. So yeah, the jury's out on this one, whether it's the first buff or the second buff. Both of them would have had action on, but in terms of this print, it's difficult to really determine.